Well, I graduated from high school in 1964. I guess I've always been kind of patriotic, and so I just thought it was my responsibility to serve. So I went down and enlisted in the Marine Corps in 1965. The recruiter said, "You want to guarantee any kind of a specialty when you go in?" And I said, "No, just put me where you need me." And he said, "How long you want to enlist for?" I said, "What are the options?" He said, 2, 3, or 4 years. So being the patriotic young man I enlisted for 4 years.
I enlisted in the Navy Reserves when I was in high school at age 16. When I graduated from high school, I went to my first 2-week annual training, got what you might call basic training in submarines.
When I went in, I went to the courthouse in San Bernardino to see about it, and I was just about 17. And I climbed the stairs. I was going up to join the Marines. I thought I wanted to be a jarhead. And they were tough, and I was tough. So I got to the top of the stairs, and there was this guy who looked just like he was the father of that bulldog that's on every Marine poster. And he had red hair and was cut short with a flat top. And I had a terrible attitude even at the age of 17. He said, "So, you came up to join a good outfit, did you?" And I said, "You're right, Killboy, the Navy."
My first semester in college, I got drafted, got a draft notice, and so I didn't want to go in the Army. So I tried joining the Navy, the Air Force. I had a couple traffic tickets, so they wouldn't take me. So I went down and joined the Marine Corps and did their test. That time, their test was very easy. I maxed the 50 questions. They said I can do whatever I want. Said I want to be a pilot, I want to go aviation. So I got aviation guarantee in the Marine Corps and ended up going in the Marine Corps.
Yeah, I enlisted, yeah. Every time I went out to get a job, they always say, "You got your service over with?" And I go, "No. When you get your service over with, come back and see me." So it was hard to get a job. Simple grocery store clerk, you couldn't do that because you got your service over with. Mm-hmm. They don't want to get a guy in or a girl in and train them and end up a good worker, and then you get drafted.
I'd been out of high school for 6 years and started my career, and the mailman came down the driveway singing, "You're in the Army now." And 2 weeks later, I was in the Los Angeles Induction Center and on a bus on my way to Fort Sill, Oklahoma.
I got a letter in the mail saying you're about to be drafted. I went down, talked to recruiting officers, and they got me into an OCS program. So I finished out the year teaching, and then I went OCS. And for the next 10 months, I couldn't get out of the South.
Obviously, I wasn't drafted. I enlisted. Some people might wonder why I enlisted during the war, but I'd always wanted, for quite a long time, wanted to enlist. And because the war was going on, didn't stop me. I wasn't really particularly for or against it, but it was my time to do my service. It was the right age, so I went ahead.
I attended the U.S. Naval Academy in Annapolis, Maryland. And we had a choice when we graduated to go in the Marine Corps or the Navy, and quite a few of us opted for the Marine Corps. At the same time we were handed our diploma, we were handed our commission.
I was pre-med in college, but I was carrying a full load in addition to the 18 units, and I wound up having to drop a class, which at that time the draft had my number. So I went in, instead of going to the Army, I decided I was going to enlist in the Navy Reserve. I figured Navy and Reserve, it probably wouldn't go to Vietnam, and I was really wrong about that.
Graduated out of high school, and at that time, you either went to higher education or you were going to be drafted. I went with several of my friends. We lived in the Torrance Redondo Beach. I was a surfer at the time, lived at the beach, and didn't really want to go in the Army. So we all went in on the buddy system down to San Diego to boot camp. All of our buddies went everywhere, but we weren't buddies anymore. I was very fortunate to be stationed at a beautiful place called Miramar Naval Air Station.
I knew that if you were drafted, of course, then you'd be infantry. You'd go right up to the front lines in Vietnam. I went to the Army recruiter, and they gave me a test. It was an artificial language test, and I aced it. I did really well because it was just something. It was like a game to me. It was just very, very simple. And so they said, well, you know what? I think we can use you, and you can actually we can give you a different type. We can give you a language to study. And so they said, well, what languages would you like to study? So I said, well, Japanese, Spanish, and I think I put maybe French or something. They said, well, we'll give you two choices, North or South Vietnamese. And so I said, well, where's the enemy? And they said, well, the enemy's in the north. I said, well, I'll study South Vietnamese.
Now, at that time, if you were drafted, it was a 2-year commitment, and almost always that meant trained as an infantryman, handed a rifle, and sent to the jungles of Vietnam. I didn't like that option, but I also didn't like the option of going to prison for dodging the draft. I also didn't like the option of going to Canada to live the rest of my life without ever seeing my family, because at that time that was the only other option. And so I went ahead and enlisted.
I was actually drafted right out of college. My draft board in Brooklyn, New York was short of people, so they, in going down the list of people who had deferments, they take whatever they can. And so they give you a battery of tests, IQ tests and aptitude tests, and they called me in and they said that we'd like to assign you to a more, not important, but a different type of classification for which you'll need some additional training. And we're happy to do that for you, but you'll have to essentially give up your draft status, which is a 2-year commitment, and enlist for 3 years. So they were asking me for an extra year in order to, the quid pro quo was for me to get some additional training and hopefully at the end of the training not have a rifle in my hands in the jungle.
I had been flying as a civilian flight instructor in San Diego, and someone kind of turned me on to pursuing a military flying career, and so I went down, I took the test, did very well on the test. I was happy, and they said, when can you start? And so I enlisted in early 1981 and was promptly shipped off to Pensacola to begin aviation officer candidate school. San Diego's a Navy town. Actually, I did not grow up in San Diego. My wife grew up in San Diego. And when I mentioned to her the idea of me joining the Navy, she had grown up around sailors and had a different impression about the Navy. She was not really connected to the whole concept of serving in the Navy, you know, as an officer and as a pilot. And she quickly warmed to the idea.
You know, going through boot camp, there's kind of a lot of funny things that happen in boot camp. You don't know what to expect. You know, I was an 18, 19-year-old young man from a small Midwestern state from Des Moines, Iowa. And we get there, and the first thing they do is when you get into the Marine Corps recruit depot in San Diego is give you a haircut. And there was about, I want to say 7 or 8 seats of barbers. There was 30 or 40 of us, so they went in a shift at a time. Didn't take very long, 2 minutes. The young recruits came out, they had no hair.
I said to him, I just got a haircut 2 days ago. So if you want, you can just give me a trim. But what he did was he cut the center of my hair. Next, and there I am with hair in the side of my, because I had long hair.
Here I am thrown into a situation where I've got drill instructors telling me what to do, when to do it, where to do it, how to do it.
I found out that I had been accepted to officer candidate school, and then I was sent to Anniston, Alabama, to Fort McClellan. Back where I'd had basic training, they had women's officer candidate school there. Officer candidate school was 6 months in those days, and it was before cell phones and all of that. We were in isolation, really, and they told us we would be. We weren't allowed to use a telephone. We couldn't communicate with families. We couldn't watch television. So we were basically pretty isolated.
I was regular Army, and when I came out of OCS, they sent me to Columbus, Ohio. I became a National Guard advisor to an artillery battalion. Didn't have a clue.
Of course, in the Marine Corps, what they say is you're an infantry first and a specialist second. So all Marines have to go to infantry training in some fashion or other. But I ended up going to Communications Electronics Battalion and became a Tactical Air Operations Center anti-aircraft weapons operator. And essentially what that meant was that I did something similar to air traffic control.
Once I enlisted, my first post was Fort Polk, Louisiana. That was quite an experience as basic training. Anybody who's gone through basic training knows what that was like. It was not fun. Drill sergeants, I think, were generally picked because they had the personality of a pit bull that had been beaten all of its life.
Somehow I got through basic training, and then I was sent to Army Language School, to the Defense Language Institute Support Command. I studied Vietnamese language for 34 weeks, 6 hours a day. Every hour we had a different teacher. There were 4 of us in a class, and every hour a teacher would rotate so that we would hear different accents.
Once I got to Moffett Field and went through the RAG and got qualified on the P3, then got assigned to a squadron, and then ironically, the crew that I got assigned to in the squadron I was in, the plane commander was the guy who had gone through primary flight training at the same time as I did, and out of the 36 primary flight students that got to select a path, he and I were the only 2 that got what we wanted, the P3 community. And I ended up on his crew. And then later, I had deployments subsequent to that to Iceland, 6 months in Iceland. I had a 6-month deployment to Japan. I rose through my qualifications to eventually become a plane commander, a flight instructor, a NATOPS check pilot. And we thoroughly enjoyed our time in the Bay Area at Moffett Field.
And when the war broke out, my dad said to my brother, because he was older, he says, it's time I ship you off to Kemper Military School so that if the war breaks out, you'll be prepared. Well, he was prepared, and he became the youngest GI instructor in the history of the Marine Corps because of his Kemper Military School. But my dad was concerned that he had that training if he had to go into combat. He didn't go into combat. I had to go into combat.
I walked past the post office one day in Alhambra, California, where I was living. And they had a recruiting office in there. So I walked in, there was a chief sitting behind the desk. And he asked me who I was. I told him. And he asked what my rate was. I told him it was E5, Interior Communications Electrician, second class. And he turned around, the chief turned around and said, "Hey, sailor, get this petty officer a cup of coffee." Oh, that's the Navy I wanted to be in. Yes. So I had the cup of coffee, and he said, "Now, what would it do to get you back into this man's Navy?" So I came up with a brainstorm, knowing they couldn't do it. And I said, well, I want to go to submarine school, and I want to go to nuclear power school.
The first sergeant, the company commander, the battalion commander, the whole bunch all the way up. We knew better than they did. We were PFCs. We've been in, 3 or 4 months by now. We knew better. And we said, well, we'll show them. And we lined up in front of the first sergeant's office and said, we want to transfer. He said, where? We said, anywhere. Well, he was very happy to hear that, because the next morning we were all signed up, ready for duty beyond the seas, which at that time meant going to Korea.
I never went to Vietnam. They would not send me. Main reason, I was the only grandson. I'm the only one that could take the name on. I told him, if they tell me I'm going to Vietnam, I'm going to go. I'm not going to fight it. But because of the Sullivan Act, they couldn't send me because I was the last surviving member of my family that could take the name on.
I was told when I got to Columbus I was going to Vietnam in 6 months, but fortunately that never came through. And I didn't have to leave the country, which I'm grateful.
15 years later, 1965, I get a call from the National Council of YMCA, Mr. Kramer, we're flying you back to New York. We want to talk to you. And when I got back there, they said, we pulled your resume. We see you went to Fort Lewis, Washington for 6 weeks Army, and somehow you got in the Marine Corps. Well, that's a different story. But anyway, what happened, we want you to go to South Vietnam under the banner of the USO, and we're going to pay your salary. You're going to be there for 2 years. Will you go? I said, once a Marine, always a Marine.
Just prior to me shipping out for Germany, the Army had pulled a lot of people out of Germany for Vietnam. And so a lot of the experienced folks had left. And so there were a lot of empty slots available. One morning, about the third or fourth morning, that I fell out for reveille. First sergeant asked if anybody could type. Well, I shot up my hand so fast that was a really great job. Number one, you didn't have to do kitchen KP. You didn't have to pull guard duty. You were generally always inside where it was warm. Part of the job of the U.S. military over in Germany is training, and for artillery, we didn't train in locally where our barracks were. So we'd be shipped out to Grafenwehr, which is a mountainous area, and that was a training site for artillery.
We were deployed on the USS Ranger, CVA 61, to the Westpac South China Sea. And for the year of 1964 and 65, I had 2 Westpac cruises that was very interesting. This was the start of the Vietnam conflict. In 1964, we had a fire at sea on the Ranger. We were dead at sea for 30 days. It was a life-changing experience. I was young and made it through.
We started hearing the rumors about a big North Vietnamese offensive into South Vietnam. It was called the Easter Offensive because it started in the spring of '72. There were 3 main offensives in the Vietnam War by the North Vietnamese. One was Tet in February of '68, and then the Easter Offensive in the spring of '72, and then the final offensive in the spring of '75 when they took over all of Vietnam.
And then I started getting warned that they said, whatever you do, don't get 1-9. Turns out 1-9, 1st Battalion, 9th Marines had already been wiped out in Vietnam a couple of times. And so the Marines at Camp Pendleton warned me, don't get that battalion, like I would have anything to say about it. It didn't work, because after my Fleet Marine training, I went to Vietnam, and they were also saying in Da Nang, don't get 1-9, and then eventually I got 1-9.
From Fort Sam, I received my orders for Vietnam and reported to the 45th Air Ambulance Company. The headquarters for that company was in Long Binh, just northeast of Saigon. At that time, it was either one of, or perhaps even the largest army base in the world. It was huge. But that was our headquarters. We flew missions out of there, but we also had standby posts all around the area, both north, east, south, and west of there.
And while we were traveling, a day prior to hitting the beach in Vietnam, I don't know who she was. I always said it was Tokyo Rose, but she announced that all the Marines, all the Navy personnel, and all other branches of service that were aboard that ship are all dead. First thing I did was touch myself. I ain't dead. Are you dead? Are you? No, nobody was dead.
When I joined 1st Marines, we were south of the DMZ. I was assigned guard duty. Well, I'd been told that Luke the Gook was just over the hill. So I have the flashlight in my left hand, the pistol in my right hand. I sneak around the side of the tent, and I certainly hear people, I hear mumbling going on. I can't tell what it is. In one motion, I let the latch go, let the slide go home, turn on the flashlight, and I yell, "Pull it!" or something like that. Here were 3 buck sergeants shooting craps, and they were drunk. And they recognized the sound of that pistol. They recognized the not very, very confident sound of my voice at that time, and they were grabbing dice and money and just bugging out.
We have what we call a code in the Marine Corps. It's innovate, adapt, overcome, think out of the box, and always have a contingency plan. I'm with you today because of the contingency plan. We were the first division in the middle, and we had a Turkish division on our right-hand side. That's a total of 90,000 men on the line. And General MacArthur said, the Chinese are forming, but don't worry about it. They're not going to come over. They're just trying to scare us. Well, they came over, and you have to understand, they came over with 10 divisions. We were completely surrounded, 10 times 30,000. Our generals had a contingency plan where we were actually going down a goat trail, and we took our trucks and our equipment and put them on the trucks and threw them over so the enemy couldn't get it. We put our dead and wounded Marines on stretchers and put them across the hood of the truck so that we could go down the goat trail and the enemy would be firing on us, but we had a Marine Corps fighters strafing to keep their heads down while we went down this goat trail. And we went down to Hangnam, and then we took our people out to the hospital ships. That was our job with the Amtrak.
I was stationed and I had to go to Indianapolis, Indiana. I went to Adjutant General School, and there I met my wife. Most memorable occasion. I was there for 9 weeks. She was there for 6 weeks. There was a 3-week overlap, and during that time, as I tell it, she proposed. She tells it differently. It's been good. It's lasted 52 years. Best thing that ever happened to me.
If my children told me that they met and accept a marriage proposal after 3 weeks, I don't know what I would have done. But it worked out. So we met in July of 1967. Our first date was 4th of July. We were married at Christmas that year. We had to wait till we could both get leave on Christmas vacation. And my husband is Catholic, and in those days you couldn't get married in the Catholic Church till after Christmas, so we had to wait until after Christmas and still be able to get our military leave. And we went to Rhode Island, where my husband's from, and got married.
Vietnam was really roaring along. I'd had some experiences there, but I'd rather not talk about them. No, I can't.
We were there probably about 2 weeks, 3 weeks, and we showed up with just the weapons we could carry. When the air wing came in, they trucked in a ton of bombs, and we had a separate bomb dump that was about a mile away, so that's where all the ordnance was kept. One day they said, "Hey, Lieutenant Spear, go over to the bomb dump and see what the air wing has that might help us, what kind of ammo," and, because, obviously we didn't have much. I had a little green memo notebook that everybody seemed to have, and so I went over and I found this gunnery sergeant that was in charge, and I said, "Hey, Gunny, I'm Lieutenant Joe Blow from the Grunts. What do you got that can help us?" And he said, "Well, Lieutenant," and he started going, he just went down this list from memory. And I had been writing everything down because I knew I wouldn't remember everything. But I didn't write down that we had frag grenades. Because, this is an unfortunate side effect of the whole Vietnam thing is guys would take grenades and use them to get even with people they didn't like. As a brand new second lieutenant, been overseas about a month, I made this decision that it was going to be over almost my dead body before we'd issue grenades to our unit. This captain says, "Well, hey, don't they have any frag grenades?" And I just said, "No, sir, they don't," And that was kind of a big thing for me to say that. It was taking on a lot of responsibility. I wasn't sure if they would ever find out. If they did, I didn't know if they would praise me or ship me back to Okinawa, frankly. But I just said, there's no way I'm going to allow this to happen, as long as it was within my control. And I think, evidence later proved that was a good decision. And I never told anybody. The first time I told anybody about that was about 3 or 4 years ago. I told one of my kids.
Our battalion has the record in the Marine Corps, the most killed in action of any Marine unit, and also the longest sustained combat of any Marine unit. So they're called the Walking Dead. And actually the name was given by Ho Chi Minh when he, after the relatives were killed, he told his generals that they don't know yet, but they're the Walking Dead. Probably the worst battle that I was in was, we called it Hill 64. It was about a quarter mile away from the main base. We had a first platoon of Alpha Company. I was at the time senior corpsman of Alpha Company. When I had been at Contian, I was platoon corpsman for 1st Platoon. So those guys were then up on that hill a quarter mile away. And at nighttime, they got attacked and got overrun. And we were listening on the radio to them yelling for help, and we couldn't go. They wouldn't let us go out while it was dark, because that would have been another disaster. So as soon as it got light, we geared up and went up to retake the hill. And that was pretty horrific. There was at least 150 enemy bodies left, and 28 of our 1st platoon were killed in that battle.
All I can see, we fired thousands of rounds and took thousands of rounds back. And we're always in gun runs and fires, dropping insertion teams, picking teams up, supporting different elements on the ground. Anywhere there was a firefighter or call, they'd call us and we'd go in. So we got called numerous times a day, constant firefights. Lost about half the crew chiefs in our squadron we lost. And this is the story that God was with me. I was at Marble Mountain, had my aircraft, and I got a toothache. I went to the dentist. They had to replace me with a guy. The guy took my flight that day. The whole crew got killed. The aircraft went in and got shot out of the air. So I didn't think nothing of it at the time. Then the next time I had to go, they did a root canal. Next time I went back, a week or two later, the guy took my flight, got shot. And the third time I went back to finish it up, they took my bird from a gunship because I lost 2 birds. They gave me a dirty slick. A dirty slick doesn't have the armament on it. So the guy took my flight. The 2 guys that took my flight actually were in it, and the pilots. They were low bird on the Da Nang River, too high. Well, they caught 50 cal anti-aircraft, were waiting for them, and they got killed. So all 3, and that's the part I have problems with. I feel guilty that these guys took my flights.
All of us there had a secret security clearance, which for the most part was sufficient, but we did have one line that was calling in airstrikes from Washington through Fort Shafter, Hawaii, through us and then on to Saigon, and it was a very critical line, and the rating on that one was top secret. Well, I didn't have a top secret clearance, and here I was one night all by myself in the communications center, charged with maintaining this critical equipment and keeping it up and running. And sure enough, that one top secret line went down. And so I was faced with a moral dilemma. I think as most people would do, I chose to fix it, got it up and running very quickly. And the next morning I reported to my commanding officer what had happened and what I had done. And it's a very interesting reaction that I got from him. He told me all the reasons why I did the wrong thing and why I could be court-martialed, but he wasn't going to take that role. And then as he was dismissing me, and I get a little emotional when I think about it, he stood up, and if you know military protocol a little bit, he stood up and saluted me and said, "Nice job, soldier," and dismissed me. So I was proud of that.
And so pretty much every day I spoke to the enemy, and the ones that we spoke to were all they were all wounded. Many people believe or assume that interrogators torture people. We never ever tortured anyone. We questioned them, tried to make sure that they were telling the truth. We would ask them questions in different ways or different times to make sure that what they were telling us was accurate. We based it on other intelligence that we had to make sure that they were telling us the truth about their units, about their mission. And at the same time, it's really interesting that these evacuation hospitals, at the same time that Vietnamese, North Vietnamese or VC, Viet Cong prisoners were brought in, wounded prisoners were brought in, at the very same time, American soldiers were also brought in. And American soldiers were on the next cot, on the next bed.
When we went into a landing zone, and by the way, we went into any condition, whether they were in contact or not, whether the battle was going on or not, our job was to get in, get the patients out, get them to the hospital. The biggest job for guys like myself, the pilot, was to make sure to find a way to get in and out safely without getting ourselves shot. Dust-off crews did amazing jobs. I know I can't say this without being somewhat self-gratifying, but the truth is the guys that I flew with were heroes, every one. They went in, they went out. Did not matter. And because of the fact that we did that we went in without guns, anytime, good weather, bad, day, night. By the end of the war, the Army statistics showed that dust-off crews suffered more than 3 times the casualty rate of any other helicopter mission in the war. But yet, we did it. They did it. My job was to get us in and out. The guys in the back, my medic and my crew chief, are the real heroes. The crew chief was responsible for the aircraft, although he was cross-trained by the medic to be just as good a medic as himself. And they performed miracles. I mean, they performed miracles to save lives en route. You have to imagine, it was an open helicopter, it was hot, so we always flew with the big cargo doors open. And the helicopters were windy. They were seldom flying really smooth. And so it was a bumpy, windy ride. Most times the patients they picked up had been in combat on the ground for sometimes days, even weeks. They were dehydrated because they were in the jungle. They were also in shock and or dehydrated as a result of their wounds, meaning their veins were often collapsed. They were covered with dirt and grime, and yet my medics, my crew chiefs, always were able to get an IV going to get fluids into that patient. They performed miracles back there. Those guys were great.
And during the Big Tet Offensive, again, we were overlooking Da Nang. We could see Da Nang down below us. And the helicopters that were firing their machine guns or 50 calibers, whatever they were firing at the enemies, every fifth round was a tracer. So it just looked like a stream of fire coming out of those helicopters at night when you observe those tracer rounds.
The people who flew those helicopters, we would see those helicopters at nighttime with those tracer rounds, and we knew we were being protected. We could see them, and we love those helicopter pilots.
Unfortunately, we did get into a fire mission. A fire mission, I never done anything like this before, but I fired the rounds, but this time I was firing at an enemy. At least that's what I thought. After the firing was over, we marched over to the area that I fired the mortar rounds at. What I saw was very, very sad. I cried. I'm a crybaby, I'm sorry, but I do cry. I had blown up a village. Women and children. Old people. I kept asking, where's the enemy? Evidently they took off. I don't know. But I felt bad, and I've always felt bad because of that. But that was a job I had to do. We had gone a little further when we were attacked. One of my head gunners was wounded from an explosion of some sort. I picked him up with the equipment I had, helped drag the whole works. Anyway, to make a long story short, we didn't go that far. And I put him down by the trees. And he did not die that I know of. But the corpsman who came up to fix him up, after he did what he was doing, he told me, now I'm gonna fix your nose. And I go, what's wrong with my nose? You got blood. I didn't even feel it. And he goes, Richard, you're gonna get a Purple Heart for that. And I go, okay, well, just fix it, will you? I said, how do you know my name? Who are you? You son of a gun, it's me, Stan Stewart. We ran track together in junior high school and high school. I go, holy smokes, what are you doing here? I'm the corpsman.
We're entering the harbor, and there were these little big speedboats pulling girls with bikinis waving at us, and fireboats shooting their red, white, and blue. It was beautiful.
My last job was a survivor's assistance officer. It was the last thing I had to do. I wasn't the first person to go in contact, but I had to do the follow-up, attend the funeral. It was a tough job. Wouldn't want to do that all the time.
But by that time, I wasn't sure if I wanted to make it a full career. And I said, well, I've got this 2-year period in which I will decide. And in those 2 years, I came out here to Camp Pendleton. I was an infantry company commander out in 1st Marines. At that point, I decided, yeah, I've had enough fun. I'm feeling guilty about all the fun I've had. I better get out in the real world and see what I can do. So that's what I did.
The clerk comes up to the back room where I was at, and he looked at me and goes, what are you doing here? Well, I was sleeping. What's up? You're out of the Marine Corps. What do you mean I'm out of the Marine Corps? I got your papers downstairs and your ticket. I came home. I was out of the Marine Corps. And I didn't want nothing to do with the Marine Corps anymore. But I love the Marine Corps, regardless of what I went through in the beginning. I always have. I just didn't like the idea that my friends got slaughtered and died. I'm Gunnery Sergeant Poulter, United States Marine Corps, one of the original Walking Dead. Thank you.
When I left the Marine Corps in 1969, they had something called a school cut, and you could actually get out up to 90 days early to go to college. You had to be accepted into college, and they would let you out 10 days prior to the first day of college. So what that turned out to be for me is 45 days early. So I got out 45 days early, went to college in my hometown in Des Moines, Iowa, and I took advantage of the GI Bill. I got my bachelor's degree and first master's degree.
When I first went into the Army, I was living in Brooklyn, New York. And when I was discharged 3 years later, I was married, knew I didn't want to, we didn't want to go back to New York. Although we were New Yorkers, we weren't really New Yorkers at heart. And so we just got in the car. I was discharged in New Jersey, got in the car and drove west, not really knowing what our destination was going to be. And we almost stopped and set down roots in Denver. But it was August, and the weather was beautiful, and we started thinking about what it would be like in January and February. Didn't really want to go through that, so we just kept driving and wound up at the Pacific Ocean and settled in San Diego.
I found myself with these periods of time off as an airline pilot, 3-4 days a week off. And so I started getting involved in my community. It started with helping in my daughter's class. And then eventually someone said, hey, you should run for city council. And of course, I didn't know any better, so I did. I got elected in Murrieta. Then we moved to Temecula. I ran in Temecula, got elected there. And now here I am as a county supervisor. But I think the beginning of that, the seed of that was placed in me by my love of being involved in something in the military that I felt mattered. And if you look back, my deployment in Iceland, where we tracked Soviet subs that were all armed with nuclear missiles, almost assuredly aimed at America. I can remember feeling a sense of pride that I was doing my part to protect our country.
Coming back from the service, I was able to get myself a job at McDonnell Douglas and lived down at the beach to get a little relaxation after the service. From there, went into the auto recycling business and became a reserve officer with the city at Torrance for 9 years.
When I got back here finally, after 6 months of traveling around the world, I spent 6 months. And I just saw everything. Well, when I got back, I said to the YMCA, what are you going to do with me? He says, Don, you're going to be the Hollywood director of the Hollywood YMCA. I said, why me? He said, because we want to honor you for the time you spent over there. And we know your brother lives in Beverly Hills, and you've been up north with the Y for 12 years. We're going to put you closer to your brother.
One of the main job that I had flying at home was flying for news companies. My very first mission I flew for a news report was actually to cover the story of baby Jessica that had fallen down the water well in the middle of Texas. That was the very first time I took a news crew out to cover a story. I won't forget that one. That was quite interesting. A dear friend said, Jim, you ought to be a nurse. And when I thought about what my medics had done in Vietnam, they were, at that time, always had been, still are, my heroes. I said, yeah, I think you're right. I went into nursing, ultimately ended up as a dialysis nurse, and then my final years of dialysis nursing, I got the opportunity to become a home dialysis nurse where I trained the patients to do their own treatments at home. They stayed much healthier, they lived longer. I'm still in touch with some of my patients to this day, even though I've been retired for about 5 years.
I remember the last day I was in Vietnam. I got on the plane in Da Nang as an airliner, and they're taking off, and I remember gripping the things because that whole year I had the thought that I knew I was going to die. So I didn't worry about dying because I knew I was going to die. But then the last day I'm thinking, okay, this is when it's got to happen. And I'm gripping the thing, waiting for the enemy to hit this plane, and it never did. I wound up, they got up to 10,000 feet, and they turned off the seatbelt light, and everybody let out a big cheer. And I thought, what happened? I didn't die. I was so surprised, you know. Basically, when I came back, I had pretty heavy PTSD. Had real issues when I first went to sleep because that's the most dangerous time. You're not supposed to go to sleep. If you're on watch, you're not supposed to go to sleep. In fact, at Quezon, we had an order, don't go to sleep. You are on 24-hour alert. Well, that means you just lay there with one eye open, resting all night, listening to make sure you're not being overrun. And I remember sleeping, I had my wife tell me I slept that way for 20 years with one eye open.
I did not talk about this until 10 years ago, anything. I could not even talk to you now. But I went for counseling with the VA administration because I was having anxiety attacks when someone asked me about what happened. It still affects me to this day, but I can talk about it. And when I came back, I did have severe PTSD, did not know what it was. I would wake up in the middle of the night thinking I'm in Vietnam and going, I guess you'd call it, I don't know, whatever they call it when you're going through where you see something and it's not there. I wake up in the middle of the room and I think I'm in the jungle. And I wouldn't come out of it. I mean, my eyes would be wide open in this room and I would see something else. It was traumatic. And I went through that for years. And it's everyone handles it differently.
It was my military experience, like the kids in my age, we were kids, we grew up, and we came back. We didn't talk too much about what was going on when we came back. It was sort of a silent, and not until, I would say, this last few years that people really recognized us for what we were. But when we came back home, we just kind of slipped in, took our uniforms off, and just didn't really talk too much about our experience.
Public opinion was pretty bad, actually. When we came back, they were waiting at the airport. As we getting off the plane, there was people lining up on both sides to yell at us and throw pennies and stuff. So the first thing I did when I got home was got rid of all my uniforms and mementos and everything. I just didn't tell people I had been to Vietnam. And it turns out that's a lot of the guys did the same thing. They just went undercover. And I think that was a bad thing because one of the things of PTSD is you need to be able to voice what you went through to help take the agony out of it and make it into things that you could discuss. But we didn't do that, so I think that didn't help with the PTSD.
I have some mixed feelings about being an Army recruiter during Vietnam because, like I said, I've been called a baby killer. And I think recruiting nurses was a good thing. But looking back on being part of a recruiting situation in an unpopular war has sometimes made me not feel so proud of my second half of my Army service. I've been told that shouldn't be the case, but it's a little disconcerting.
Troops who came home from Vietnam, it was a very unpopular war. Because of things that had hit the news, all troops returning were pretty much classified as baby killers, which is so untrue. I know every single crew in my dust-off company prioritized wounded children higher than anything. The Army rules at that time were that no civilians were to be taken to an American hospital unless their wounds were classified or were determined to be inflicted by U.S. soldiers. Whenever we picked up children, the dust-off crew immediately determined that their head cold was inflicted by U.S. personnel. All Vietnamese children in my unit went to a U.S. hospital, no matter what. One day, I got a call from a South Vietnamese unit that we had to pick up some casualties. There were about 7 or 8 members of the South Vietnamese army sitting around casually smoking. None of the casualties were soldiers. They were all children of all ages. The South Vietnamese patrol had been ordered to go clear a minefield in the bamboo patch. Very dangerous work. So they thought it would be better to go to the nearby village, gather up all of the children, and herd them through that bamboo patch. I had at least 15, perhaps 20 children on that helicopter that I took to the hospital. I would like to think that those Vietnamese troops would never do that in any other circumstance. I've got so many emotions, the fact that they did it in any case. But that's just the kind of things that war does to people. And that's the kind of victims that result in warfare.
So many people died. Over 58,000 Americans died. And so many more wounded. And all the families that were affected, millions of families, American families were affected, and Vietnamese. And I remember talking to Vietnamese soldiers, North Vietnamese soldiers, who came down. They didn't want to come either. I remember talking to them. They didn't want to fight. They were forced also. And talking to them, they had families in North Vietnam, and those families had parties for them before they left. And they had loved ones, families. And so it was terrible. It was a horrible war. It was a big mistake. Now I know. I didn't know then. Up until about a year ago, I didn't belong to any veterans organizations. It's only been in the last year that I joined Post 4089 here in Temecula. They're a great group of men and women that care about the community, care about the veterans and veterans' families. They contribute to the community. They're always helping people.
To be honest, there are certain things that in life that you'd rather not bring up all the time, at least for me. Not that I'm not proud of it, I'm fiercely proud of it. But it's the past. I certainly respect those who do get involved.
I do. I'm wearing my Vietnam Dust Off Association shirt. We do meet every year around different locations around the country. I didn't learn of the existence of the association until pretty late, years ago. And I avoided going for quite a few years after that because I just wasn't sure how I would react, how the other members would react. I didn't know what to expect because although overall I must say I'm proud of what I did while I was there, nobody's perfect. I wasn't perfect. I made some bum calls. And I wasn't sure if members there would remember some of those bum calls. When I made a bad call, a bad decision in a few situations.
Yeah, currently I'm involved with the Veterans of Foreign Wars here in Temecula. It's the Temecula Valley chapter. And we have events that we schedule to help servicemen and their families when they are in trouble. We have fundraisers, and we, do a lot of things to help veterans. We try to get them together. They have a facility in Temecula on the other side of the I guess we call it the creek, right? The main thing is we're trying to get veterans that need help. They need help to get their paperwork done, to get ratings for things, disabilities and so forth. And basically I've been doing that.
Us Vietnam veterans are very, very liked here in Temecula. They had a beautiful ceremony for us here a few months back for all of us veterans. The city would have us a parade, 4th of July parade. In a couple years, we, us veterans, Vietnam veterans, would walk in the parade.
At the time, I didn't think it was, but certainly looking back, I realized how it helped to mold my life. It gave me confidence that I wouldn't have had. It gave me discipline, although I was fairly disciplined myself, but the military helped to hone that. And I could see the benefits that I had received throughout my entire life. The basic training was probably one of the most traumatic things in my life, and nothing else really compared to that. And a few tragedies in my life, but not much. And so I just feel like it was a charm.
I think it'd be a good idea if any young kid thought about going to service. It wouldn't hurt anybody to put a couple of years in. I recommend to all kids who want to grow up in a hurry. Until you do grow up in a hurry.
I've got a website also called pathofhonor.org, which is for this beautiful Veterans Memorial here in Temecula. It's over at the Duck Pond at the corner of Inez and Rancho, California. And there's a duck pond there. And over in the corner are two monuments. One is for all Temecula veterans. The other one is for all veterans. It's called Letters Home. There's a beautiful bronze in there. We have red bricks in there for people that are killed in action or missing in action, and gray bricks for the rest of us that somehow survived it. And it's to honor your veteran. And I hold induction ceremonies down there to make sure everybody is personally recognized as they come into that organization, and we just do good things in the community.
I've had the honor and privilege to be a part of setting up the memorials that we have set up at the Duck Pond. The initial one, and then the more recent addition to that, I've had a role to play in getting those brought to Temecula so that we can honor our local veterans. You know, what has occurred through the years is that this area in Riverside County is significantly more affordable for families. And so what we started seeing was we were seeing a lot of service members, active duty, who were driving down to San Diego or driving over to Camp Pendleton, and their families needed community support. And so we've done all we can to be that friendly community for our service members, as well as those that are not in active duty anymore or retired veterans. So I enjoy that. I take great pride in helping them in any way I can, and that's my contribution.
You know, when you're the mayor of a city, you do have certain I don't want to say privileges, but you can do things maybe that some other people can't do. And in 2010, I recall that then Governor Schwarzenegger declared March 31st to be Welcome Home Vietnam Veterans Day in the state of California. And I thought, well, what can I do locally? What can we do locally? And so I asked my staff, we had some advance notice, and asked my staff to see how many Temecula residents we could find who were Vietnam veterans. And let's bring them into City Hall before a council meeting that happened to coincide with that March 31st date. And let's honor them. Let's figure out what to do. And so we did. We had about 50 or so. And we had a special medal struck. We called it the Mayor's Medal. Strung some red, white, and blue ribbon through each of them. And one by one, I came down off the dais and I put that medal and that ribbon on all of their necks and shook their hands. And it was a good night.